Welcome, friends, to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery. Very good day to you all. I'd like to begin as usual by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome again, everyone, to this live stream. Topic of today's session is cutting through delusion, which is what we want to be doing all the time, which is what we need to be doing all the time. I reflect on this topic a little bit, that we're living in a world of misinformation these days. And it's very difficult to quite know how to relate to the media and situations on the grander scale in the world. The news that we hear, great discernment is required. And this is nothing but a reflection of our own deluded hearts, which require a wise scrutiny, constant, vigilant, wise scrutiny in order to root out the confusion, delusion. Trains of thought can be very, by their very nature, can be very deceptive. And so any kind of constructs, mental constructs, views, opinions, ideas about things, we want to be able to hold very lightly, don't we? And use this faculty of wisdom to cut through the delusion. We could take this to the extent really where we can just acknowledge and accept that virtually everything that we think we know, the truth is always other than that. And so we can wisely consider everything that we think we know is going to be tinged with delusion, with ignorance. So cutting through delusion, the sword of wisdom, is the faculty of panya that we want to be developing. And I was interested, I was going to speak about a sutta, I probably will, in Majjhima Nikaya called Chanawada Sutta. It's Majjhima 144. It's a very touching sutta and a very interesting sutta about a monk who's terminally ill. And looking at this sutta in the last few days, I was struck by the number of similes there are in the Buddha's teachings relating to cutting through the knife, knife similes, quite graphic, quite horrible similes really, of cutting through the flesh of animals, cutting animals into pieces. These similes are all of benefit, however, because they point to this quality of cutting through that which is held together, just like the body of an animal or a person is a conglomeration of so many things all held together with vitality and consciousness, creating what we call a person. And we can see how similes of cutting apart, dismembering, dismantling the structure, the organism, the construct are useful in terms of pointing to this faculty of wisdom that is in a way quite clinical, in a way quite ruthless. Often wisdom is paired with compassion, isn't it, friends? Because there's a balancing then of this very, ruthless and clinical force or energy of wisdom that will cut asunder, that will see through, that will dismantle, that will deconstruct. And the quality of compassion that has great care and kindness within it, has a empathy and a care within it. And these two then balance one another. So for instance, in our practice, if we have a lot of wisdom, we may find ourselves really dismantling all our constructs, all our ideas, all our sense of how things are. And this can be very, in a way, a bit brutal at times. If we have a lot of compassion, we have an open heart for the world, seeing the suffering in the world and having a sense of trembling with the trembling world, of openness to the playing out of suffering in our world. And without the balance between these two, we can go a little bit astray. Too much wisdom, a bit cold, a bit clinical. Too much compassion can get lost in the world. So to have these two in balance is something we can consider as a valuable practice for us. But this quality of wisdom, the cutting edge of wisdom, comes up again and again in various similes that the Buddha gave. I'm immediately thinking of the Anthill Sutta, Vamika Sutta, where there's an extended simile, many of you will know, of the sword of wisdom delving into the ant heap. The ant heap is the representation of the body and mind of a person. The Buddha said this is like an ant heap, this experience of being a human being. The ant heap that fumes by night and flames by day, a hive of activity, restless, never at peace. That is what this body and mind are like. And in this extended simile, there's a person, a wise person, who has a knife. And the advice from the Buddha, from the Brahmin in this simile, is to delve with the knife, delve into the ant heap, cut it up, dismember, disconnect all the different parts within it and examine them. And as in this simile, the person delves with a knife, they uncover various items, such as like a bar, which signifies ignorance, a frog, which signifies anger, a tortoise, which signifies the five khandhas, the body and mind that we're composed of, that comprise a being. And in this way, this delving with the knife uncovers all of the obstacles, all of the obscurations, all of the difficulties that we encounter on the path of practice. And one by one, these objects are removed. The fork that signifies doubt. There's an axe and a block that signify the sense pleasures and how they pulverize us if we identify or attach to them. Throw out the axe and the block, throw out the frog, throw out the sieve, which signifies the five hindrances. All these objects are thrown away from the ant heap, and what's left in the end is the naga, serpent. The Buddha said, this is to be left alone. So we're delving with the knife and cutting asunder with wisdom, removing one thing after another, getting rid of, letting go of, is the process. And in the end, all that's left is the naga serpent, which signifies the arahant. That body and mind that remains when the heart has become liberated, become free from suffering, that life force that remains for however long, until the time of physical death. So this is a wonderful simile of the sword of wisdom cutting through delusion. There's also in the Satipatthana Sutta, we get the graphic simile of a cow cut up, the cow that's cut into 4 pieces. And this is a simile given to point to the 4 elements that compose, that all physical things, all material things are composed of, isn't it, friends? Earth, water, fire, and air. And everything can be divided, cut up into these 4 aspects. Every physical thing, every material thing. And so in the same way, there's a simile here of the cow that's cut up, I think at a crossroads. So this sense of, 4 quarters. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, there isn't it, it's all contemplations that are given to us to consider, to see reality through these lenses, the lens of the 4, or the lenses of the 4 elements. If we, pay attention to this body and consider it in these ways, as made up of the solid parts, the liquid parts, the moving parts, the vibratory parts, that's air element, and the temperature, fire element. If we consider that is what these bodies are made of, then wisdom really can cut through so much of our attachment and identification with this body. I'd like to read to you from some suttas on this topic of the cutting through, the knife, the quality of wisdom that is quite clinically dividing and dissecting our experience. I want to read to you from Nandaka Wada Sutta. This is Majjhima 146. In this sutta, a monk called Nandaka is invited by the Buddha to give a teaching to the bhikkhunis. And this is something that is part of our tradition, that the bhikkhunis, we have a vada, we request a teaching from a very senior monk every fortnight, every full moon and every new moon, every half moon. And so it's an opportunity for a meeting between the Bhikkhuni Sangha and the Bhikkhu Sangha, and for some sharing on Dharma. And this monk Nandaka was actually very reluctant to meet with the Bhikkhunis, to teach the Bhikkhunis, because he had some past life relationship with those Bhikkhunis that he was invited to meet with in that time and that place at the time of the Buddha. And he didn't want anyone to feel that he was kind of inclining towards those relationships again. Story goes in the commentary. Anyway, for some reason, he was a bit reluctant to offer teachings, and the Buddha encouraged him to go ahead and teach the bhikkhunis. In fact, he was renowned later on as the most skilled monk at teaching the bhikkhunis. So Nandaka meets with the bhikkhunis in this sutta, Nandaka Wada Sutta, and he's giving them a wonderful teaching, and he invites them to participate in the teaching. So rather than just sitting and listening, there's an interaction, question and answer happening. And at one point in the sutta, he gives them this teaching. I'd like to read it to you in full, friends. He says, Venerables, suppose a skilled butcher or his apprentice were to kill a cow and carve it up with a sharp butcher's knife, a gowikantana, it's a cow cutter, a machete or something like that, maybe. Without damaging the inner mass of flesh and without damaging the outer hide, he would cut, sever, and carve away the inner tendons, the sinews, and ligaments with the sharp butcher's knife. Then, having cut, severed, and carved all of this away, he would remove the outer hide and cover the cow again with that same hide. So it is quite a horrible simile, but I feel that it really symbolizes this and other similes around cutting and butchery that occur in the suttas. There's a sense of that quality of wisdom that is willing to face and cut through delusion, and the sense of that it can be done, the unpleasant, the difficult, the hard work can be done with this energy that is willing to let go of the sense of, in a way, connection, in a way, the personal, any kind of squeamishness we may have. Wisdom will meet that, be willing to move forward into difficult, messy, painful places. So I feel these similes have a kind of reason to them, or they have a flavor to them, or a sense to them, that is a part of this quality of wisdom or insight. Just that willingness to face that which we normally want to turn away from, to ignore. I mean, how many people who eat meat actually consider what happens to that animal, or that even it was an animal, the piece of meat that they're eating, even that it had a life, that it was a living being that was slaughtered in order for them to be able to eat what they're eating. We just don't go there. And so much of our reality is glossed over and just turned away from, and not in our consciousness. And so I think these quite ugly graphic similes conveying a teaching on insight, on wisdom, are significant in this way. So coming back to the reading, so Nandak is given the image of a butcher who's cut through the skin of the animal, and everything underneath is actually intact. And he lays the hide or the skin back over the corpse of the animal, the slaughtered animal. And so the appearance may not be so different from before. It may not be so different to look at. The difference being that an animal that's not been skinned is alive, and an animal that's been skinned in this way, butchered in this way, is no longer alive. It's finished. It's done. So he says, would I be speaking rightly if I were to say, this cow is joined to the hide just as it was before, having been cut up? And the bhikkhunis responded, no, Venerable Sir, because if that skilled butcher or apprentice were to kill a cow and cut and sever and carve in that way, even though he may cover the cow again with the same hide and say, this cow is joined to this hide just as it was before, that cow would still be disjoined from that hide. And then Nandaka explains his simile. He says, I've given this simile to convey a meaning. This is the meaning. The inner mass of flesh is a term for the 6 internal bases, the 6 sense bases, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. The outer hide of the cow is a term for the 6 external bases, sight, sound, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts. He says the inner tendons, sinews, and ligaments is a term for delight and lust. These have been cut in this process of skinning the cow. The sharp butcher's knife is a term for noble wisdom, the noble wisdom that cuts, that severs, that carves away the inner defilements, fetters, and bonds. So there we have it again, just as in the Anthill Sutta, the wise one takes the knife and cuts, severs. Yeah. This is the quality of wisdom. Are we willing to bring this in, to do away with our cherished views, our cherished ideas, our cherished attachments and bonds to the things that we love and care for? This is not to throw things away in a uncaring or indifferent or disinterested way. It's more like, can we see clearly the way things are? Can we notice the effect of our attachments, of our fetters on the heart? Can we see how much we suffer as a result of the things that we're attached to, the things that we identify with? Can we see how much we inflict suffering on others as a result of the things that we're attached to and the things that we identify with? This is for us to contemplate and be willing to let go, not just when it's easy to let go of things that are obviously painful and uncomfortable, but are we willing to let go, to cut through, to sever, to come out of the things that we really are attached to because they give us a good feeling, because they make us feel empowered or loved or connected? To be willing to examine our attachments in this way with the eye of wisdom that has a clinical, scientific, bigger picture aspect or sense to it. There's another sutta I'd like to touch on. One of my favorite suttas, actually, where there's a conversation between the Buddha and a monk called Punna, who is a very intrepid monk who wishes to go actually back to his homeland. He comes from a place, or came from a place at the time of the Buddha that was in the deep south of India, in an entirely different region. Somehow he managed to come up to where the Buddha was teaching. He became a monk, and he wanted to return to his lands, which were considered to be very savage and barbaric, anarchic or chaotic or dangerous places to be. And he wanted to make this journey through the Badlands to his home and to attempt to convey the Dharma to his people. And the Buddha was quite discouraging initially, saying that, this is not necessary for you to undertake this. You will quite probably endanger yourself. Maybe it's better to practice peacefully here. And Punna was very keen to go back, and he said, no, but I would like to take the risk. And the Buddha said, there's a whole sequence of possibilities. First of all, the Buddha said, what if people give you verbal abuse? How will you manage with that? And then if people were to approach you violently with a clod of earth or with a stick or with their fists? And the Buddha got to the point where he said, well, what if people were to approach you with a knife and strike you with a knife? And on each occasion, Punna gave a response that indicated that he was perfectly okay with that. He was equanimous. He was not going to be afraid. He wasn't going to react to any of these provocations, any of these abuses. He would simply feel glad that things were not worse and that he was still alive and able to continue his ministry. When the Buddha got to Puna, if the people of Sunaparanta do give you a blow with a knife, what will you do then? And Puna said, Venerable Sir, if the people give me a blow with a knife, I will think they are admirable, truly admirable, in that they have not taken my life with a sharp knife. That is what I will think. And so naturally, the Buddha follows on. If the people of this region do take your life with a sharp knife, Puna, what then will you think? And Puna responds, if the people take my life with a sharp knife, then I will think thus. There have been disciples of the Blessed One who, being humiliated, disgusted with the body and by life, have had recourse to the knife, but I have found it without seeking. Then that is what I will think, Venerable Sir. At which point the Buddha gave him his blessing to head on down to his home country, knowing that he would manage very well, not be overwhelmed by the defilements, even if he's attacked, even if his life was threatened. What actually happened was he went down there to Sunaparanta and he was able to teach the Dharma, and he became fully liberated himself over that process, that period of time that he was there. But this is a very interesting, reflection around the knife and being cut, being killed, being harmed. The kind of wisdom that can appreciate that even if this body is literally cut up, if there's any upswelling of reactivity, of hatred, of anger, then we're not seeing clearly how to relate to our experience. And it reminds me of the simile of the saw also, where the Buddha says if you're being dismembered by guys wielding a two-handled saw and you have any hatred arise as a result of this, you're not following my teaching. I can connect, friends, these suttas on these similes, rather, on the cutting of animals, the severing of animals, and how that can relate to our severing of our attachments, severing of our unclear ways of seeing, of our delusion, and this response to the possibility of being cut up in one's own body, to have this same kind of detachment, the same kind of ability to see things the way they actually are, that this life, this body, is not something to hold on to. If we were threatened and our lives were at risk, it wouldn't help us one little bit to be trying to grasp and hold on to our attachment to this life, to this body. That would only make us very fearful, very reactive. Rather, if we're able to see things clearly, to be able to open to the possibility of letting go of this body, of this life, which of course we all have to do in the end anyway. But can we have the wise attitude now to this mind and body that enables us to be fearless, to be aware that there is nothing that belongs to this one, There is nothing I can say is me, is mine, is myself. When we really see this clearly, then these similes of the cutting of the animal into pieces, signifying the clarity that wisdom brings to disconnect all that seems connected, to recognize the way things truly are, and to bring this attitude in relation to this body and this life, to be able to be free from the fear of danger, to be able to let go when it comes to the time of death without any kind of trauma, resistance, fighting and flailing and resisting. And now I'd like to read you from this beautiful Chana Awada Sutta. I put it in the suggested reading, or did I? Probably not. I'm going to put it now, a suggested reading. And I'd like to look at this sutta together in the time that we have left. Try and make some time for any questions and comments as well. This sutta is a beautiful example of what it is that makes an arahant, how to question someone to determine whether they are fully liberated or not. And again, this attitude, this understanding of how this life doesn't belong to us, how this body is not me and mine, that's really encapsulated in this sutta by what happens here. So there's a monk called Chana, and he's living up in the mountains near Rajagaha at the time of the Buddha. And the Buddha at that time was staying in the bamboo grove down on the level just outside of the city of Rajagaha. And Venerable Sariputta, Mahachanda and Chana were all staying up on the Vulture's Peak mountain. Venerable Chana was sick, suffering gravely ill. Sariputta and Chunda together went to visit Chana to see how he was getting along. And they asked him the standard question that always comes up in the suttas when someone's seriously ill. They said to him, I hope you're keeping well, Reverend Chana, Venerable Chana, I hope you're all right. I hope your pain is fading and not growing, that its fading is evident and not its growing. This Sariputta asked Chana, and he responded, I'm not keeping well, I'm not getting better, the pain is terrible and it's growing. And he describes it thus. He said, the winds piercing my head are so severe, it feels like a strong person is drilling into my head with a sharp point. The pain is so severe, it feels like someone's tightening a leather strap around my head. The winds in my belly are so severe, it's as if someone is slicing open a cow's belly with a sharp meat cleaver. Again, these strong images, violent images, describing the severity of his pain. He says it's like two people have grabbed another weaker person and they've thrown him onto a pit of glowing coals. This is how severe my pain is. So he then goes on to say to Sariputta, I think I will commit suicide. I don't wish to live any longer. And the response from Sariputta and Chunda, these two monks who've come to see him, to support him in his illness, they encourage him not to take his life. They encourage him to keep going. They offer him whatever he needs in the way of food and medicines, that they will get those things for him. So friends, my sense here is that he's ready to go. He's ready to use the knife. He has good reason to do so. But Sariputta and Chunda, because they feel that he may not be fully liberated, They encourage him to stay steady, to keep going, not to do anything unwholesome, not to end the life. And then he's not so interested in their support because he says he has everything he needs. He's determined to finish the life, which is no longer a value, is no longer a vehicle for him. There's nothing but excruciating pain left. Then Sariputta asks him this question. He says, Venerable Channa, do you regard the I consciousness, and things knowable by I consciousness in this way? This is me, this is mine, this is myself. Do you regard the ear in this way? The nose, the tongue, the body, the mind, as me, as mine, as myself? And his response to Sariputta is, I regard the I consciousness and all things knowable by I consciousness in this way. This is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. And the same with regard to the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind. So this is the question Sariputta was asking, to determine whether Channa had any trace of conceit left, any trace of I-making, my-making, any attachment to the mind and body left, if he was still a seeker, a trainee, or whether he was fully liberated. And Channa's response would indicate that he was fully liberated. Sariputta goes on further and asks him, Reverend Channa, what have you seen? What have you directly known in these things? All these sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts, that you regard them in this way. This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. And Channa's response is this. He said, Venerable Sariputta, after seeing cessation, after directly knowing cessation in those things, I regard them in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. And so he's really signifying, friends, that he's free from greed, hatred, and delusion, free from any kind of attachment. And Chunda and Sariputta don't know whether this is the case or not, since it's very possible for us to overestimate our attainments. Channa was in a very dire situation, racked with physical pain, very difficult for him to speak at all, quite probably, and they're clearly not sure how it actually is for him, which is wonderful because it gives us a chance to receive this teaching that comes next. Chunda, Mahachunda, gives Channa this most beautiful Dharma teaching, and I'd like to take it very slowly and read this teaching to you. He says, Venerable Channa, you should regularly apply your mind to this instruction of the Buddha. Friends, we should all apply our minds to this instruction of the Buddha. For the dependent, there is agitation. For the independent, there is no agitation. Where there's no agitation, there is tranquility, passaddhi. Where there is tranquility, there's no inclination. We don't incline towards this or that, or away from this or that. Where there's no inclination, there is no coming and going. Where there's no coming and going, There is no passing away and reappearing. Where there's no passing away and reappearing, there is no this life or the next or between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. This beautiful Dharma teaching, friends. Here's a monk who's in his last hours of the life. And we can appreciate that when it comes to our time, the time for the body to pass away, it's a time of great possibility. It's a time of great possible insight. We can see that we have to let go. We are urgently invited to let go of any more suffering and to recognize, to see clearly, to see with wisdom. Just as in these similes of the cutting up of the animal at the crossroads into the 4 pieces to symbolize the 4 elements that make up all material things. Just as in Nandika's teaching to the bhikkhunis, imagine a cow that's cut up, all the tendons and ligaments are severed, but underneath the flesh is left in the same way, and the skin is laid back on top. What is the difference between the living animal and this butchered animal? It is the cutting of those sinews, those ligaments that attach the skin to the mass of flesh that symbolize the attachment to sense desire, our holding to, our identification with this body, this mind. When we see clearly with wisdom the way things are, can we maintain that attachment to this body and mind? If we're able to develop in wisdom, we can let go of attachments, and so there is no shaking, there is no inclination, there is no here and there, there's no before and after, there's nothing holding together that I can say is my life, my body, my mind. Everything can fall apart. The sword of wisdom cuts up. The reality is, when we see with wisdom, that everything is already fallen apart. And so there is nothing I can call my life, my trajectory, my process, my past, my future. There is no past and future. There is no here and there. And when we can see clearly the way things are, there can no longer be any holding to this life force. And so the passing away that comes at the end of life is just another moment, a natural process, nothing much, nothing happening even. So this beautiful teaching to Channa from Chunda, after this teaching was given, the 2 visiting monks went away, and Channa used the knife to end his life. And they still weren't sure when they heard that he'd passed, that he'd taken his own life, that he'd used the knife, cut probably the jugular vein, cut the neck, ended the life. Sariputta and Chunda went to the Buddha and asked him, what was the destination of Channa? How was it for him? The Buddha, being the Buddha, could tell them. And he told them that there was nothing blameless in what had happened, and that Channa was nowhere to be found. Channa was liberated at the time of death, and so it was over. And, there was a question in the monks' minds. They had ideas that Channa was not blameless, that Channa was still attached, because he had relationships with various families in the town. Here, Channa had families who were friendly, intimate, and hospitable. And so there was a sense that Channa was somehow still attached to perhaps good food, good alms, company, support. And so they had this feeling that he was not yet completed in his task, which is why they encouraged him to continue. But the Buddha pointed out that actually Channa was fully liberated. So this is a very interesting sutta for so many reasons. This most beautiful teaching from Chunda is something to reflect on again and again. And I'd like to finish by reading it again. But also here we have Channa using the knife to cut his very own body, to kill his own body. Figures of speech, his own body. He ended the life using a knife. And this is something to really contemplate, how it is that someone who is fully liberated can do no harm by ending the life, a life that is due to end very soon, where there's enormous suffering being experienced, physical pain being experienced. This is not to say that suicide is something we should support, promote, incline towards ourselves, because until we're fully liberated, that would be a great disservice to this mind and body. There is no encouragement here to suicide, but there is an understanding of what's actually happening for someone who's fully liberated when the life comes to an end. What is the difference? What is the significance when there's no attachment, there's no identification any longer with this process of the life force playing out? There's so much there for us. I'd like, though, to finish by reading the teaching again that Chunda gave to Channa. Here it is. You should regularly apply your mind to this instruction of the Buddha. For the dependent, there is agitation. For the independent, there's no agitation. Where there's no agitation, there is tranquility. Where there is tranquility, there's no inclination. Where there's no inclination, there's no coming and going. Where there's no coming and going, there's no passing away and reappearing. Where there's no passing away and reappearing, there's no this life or the next or between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. So friends, in this rather rambling talk, I've been contemplating, considering how it is that wisdom is like a sword or a knife that cuts through, that divides and dissects, that does away with delusion, that can seem harsh or clinical or cold in a way, but actually is that which is able to sever the attachments, cut the fetters, get rid of the chains that bind us and free the heart so that we can see clearly how it is that there is nothing to identify with, there's nothing to hold to in this body, in this mind, in this life. And so how it is that we can come to the place of being able to let go of all of it with a heart that is completely unshaken, completely free from suffering, that is not trembling, that is not able to be traumatized by anything whatsoever. So, thank you for your wise attention. I hope you can cut through and divide and dissect these words and this teaching and come to the essence of the Dharma. I'm going to look at the chat now, friends. Warm greetings to you who are here for the actual live stream. Hi, Sid. Hi, Rebecca. Manal, Geetha, John, Madeline, Jayantha, Jody, Mangal, Edward, Niranja, Maria, Michael, Ronald, Empty Cloud. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you for your kind words and greetings. I'm not seeing any questions or comments at this point, so that is grand. We can, I think, conclude with 3 heartfelt sadhus to our teacher, the Buddha, remembering that one of the qualities of the Buddha that's so significant for us was his quality of great compassion. The Buddha who had the compassion that, enabled him to spend so many years, so much of his life force, of the Buddha life force, in supporting and helping and encouraging so many beings to come to some understanding of the Dharma, such that, we're sitting here today sharing this space and speaking about those very same teachings that were given 2,500, 600 years ago. It's really very awesome. The compassion of the Buddha. Let's just remember that to conclude. I've been speaking about the sword of wisdom, the knife that cuts, all these similes in the suttas and these accounts of the use of the knife. And so I'd like to, let's remember the balance, like the 2 wings of a bird, one wing of compassion and the other wing of wisdom. May we cultivate these 2 qualities and let them work together so that we can keep letting go of all the delusion, the illusion, with a heart that can take it, that can bear this process, a heart that's full of kindness and care, even as we are willing to step forward on the path and discard, dismantle, do away with all the delusions that we meet along the way. So friends, let's finish with 3 sadhus. Okay, I can't help it now. I have to come to a comment that Vivek's made. Hi Vivek, thank you. I'm going to just finish with this comment now that's come through because it's a good one. Thank you, Vivek. He says, very interesting. How could Channa be liberated if he committed suicide? Isn't that in somehow against the ideology of the Buddha's teaching? Again, I'm grateful for this, Vivek, because it gives me a chance to consider with you, friends, how could he be liberated if he committed suicide? I don't think in the committing of suicide, a person could be liberated, Vivek. Certainly not. To kill a human being is a really heinous act. However, if a person is already an arahant, is fully liberated, so there is absolutely nothing holding together. There's no attachment or identification with the body, with the mind, then to use the knife to end the life at such a time of severe physical suffering and terminal illness is not no wrongdoing can be said to have happened there. That's a blameless act. And so this is very important to appreciate, that it is only blameless when there's nothing to kill. There's nothing left to die. There's no holding to life any longer in such a way. Channa's use of the knife was a blameless act. So I hope that makes sense, Vivek, and thank you for bringing that in so that I could try to clarify a little bit more on this important point. I've got one more question. We've still got some minutes. I'm going to respond to this one that's just come in. Thank you again, Vivek. And if liberated and in a state of nirvana, would he not feel the pain detailed? Oh, wonderful. Appreciate this too, Vivek. Pain is pain. The Buddha felt pain. The Buddha was obviously fully liberated. And he still had physical issues. He had back pain, he had stomach pain, had some wind issues. The back pain sometimes was so severe that the Buddha would lie down and let someone else take over the teaching that he was giving. So there is still the natural arising of pain and pleasure in the body, even when a person is fully liberated. The mind is free from suffering. There's no reactivity. There's no confusion in the relationship with what is felt. What is felt is simply what is felt. And the reason there's pleasure and pain is because of certain causes and conditions, and all of that can be known and felt by a person who's fully liberated without causing any extra suffering. But pain is pain. The simile of the two arrows comes to my mind, Vivek. The Buddha said, isn't it, when you're hit by an arrow, if a person's hit by an arrow, there's this much pain, severe pain, one would imagine. But what happens when we are steeped in delusion, when we're still subject to the defilements, we will add to that pain by resisting it. Why me? Why has this happened to me? Who shot the arrow? Why did they shoot the arrow? What am I going to do? How am I going to get revenge? There's so much additional suffering that we can bring in through our ignorance if pain is present for us. But actually, if one is fully liberated, there would still be the pain of that arrow, but it would stop there. It wouldn't go anywhere else. There wouldn't be any proliferation around it. There wouldn't be any reactivity towards it. But pain, nevertheless, would be felt. So Channa was fully liberated, but he was still subject to, as he described, the most racking, burning, severe, intolerable pains. He could tolerate them, but the body was coming to an end. He was severely ill. He chose to end the life by using a knife. It was a blameless decision. If being free from greed, hatred, and delusion meant that we were in some way numb to pain, there would have been no need for him to make that decision. But it doesn't make us numb. One who's fully liberated is not, in my understanding, numb to pain. Pain is still pain. Feeling is still feeling. Everything's functioning in the same way, friends. Like the cow that's cut up, where the skin is placed back over the body, as if that animal was just sleeping. The difference between someone who's fully liberated and someone who's still subject to greed, hatred, and delusion is that in a person who's fully liberated, it's as if the cow is cut up. There's no longer any connection between the skin and the corpse. Do you see? The cow looks the same. An arahant would look like anyone else, would feel like anyone else, but the attachment to feeling, the identification with feeling is no longer present. It's gone. It's been cut. It's been severed, just like the knife cutting through the flesh, cutting the skin off of the flesh of the cow. There is no longer any relationship there. I hope that makes sense. So Channa could still feel pain. He wasn't suffering in the way that a person who resists or struggles with or fights or questions pain would suffer, but nevertheless the pain was there and it was very severe. And so he made the choice to use the knife and let this life force come to an end. Blameless decision. Thanks, Vivek. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad. I hope that really does make sense for you. Thanks, everyone, for your wise attention. We really are out of time now. So let us cease. Let us conclude this session with 3 heartfelt sadhus. Gratitude for our compassionate, wise teacher, the Buddha. Sadhu, 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 animoda.